Okay then, guys, here we are today, joined by Mark Dawes of NFPS. I think most people know who you are, Mark, but if they don't, do you want to give yourself just a little brief introduction to who you are, what you do?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been in the industry now for probably 30 years. I'm probably one of the older guys in the industry. I started off teaching self-defense. It was a hobby of mine, became a passion, and I ended up running martial arts classes and doing all sorts of stuff.
Sure.
And then we sort of turned that into a business, really, because I think many, like most people out there, all of us want to do what we love and follow our dreams.
Yeah.
So I took the bold decision many, many moons ago to turn it into a business. And yeah, and it's been good ever since, really. I mean, we have ups and downs like we have now with COVID.
Of course, yes.
Challenges come, but I've lived through two of these before, which was the 2000-2001 financial crisis, which was the biggest one we had at the time. And then we had the housing and the financial crisis, 2007-2008. So this is just a lucky number 3, But yeah, I mean, most people know me. I've done various things. I've authored books on stuff. I've worked as an expert witness, but I'm just a bloke, really, that enjoys doing what he does.
Perfect, good. How did you get started then? So you said that you started training in self-defense or started teaching self-defense. How did your journey in that begin?
Well, I've spent most of my formative years from when I left school in the Royal Navy. I joined the Royal Navy. I loved it, absolutely loved it. Rose through the ranks. Ended up being a lieutenant, aircrew, and then I had a falling out, shall we say, with the Navy. There was an issue over my pension, and it was when I transferred over to be a commissioned officer, so I wasn't very happy.
Yeah.
And the net result with that was I decided to resign my commission and come outside, and I was basically £4,000 in debt, living in a bedsit.
Right.
And it was a genuine choice, some nights, whether you had a pie or whether you had half a pint of beer. That's about how much money I had.
Right.
And I landed a job, very fortunately, with Apple Computers in the early days. I did very well at that. And then I went into the prison service. I decided to become a prison officer. So, if people are watching this thinking I've got some great game plan where I've had a 5-year strategy, not at all. My life is a succession of train crashes that have led me to where I am now. So if people have got this thing in their head that you must have this master plan, trust me, you don't need it. And as a sideline to that, I was teaching jiu-jitsu. I was running jiu-jitsu classes.
Okay.
And I think the definitive point really was when a woman turned up at the club one day, and she sat on the side. And at the end of the session, she came and spoke to me, and she said, "Look, my son's being badly bullied at school. He needs to do this, but he won't come because, as with all people that have been in those situations, they lack the self-confidence even to go to the clubs."
Sure.
So she said, "Can you teach me something so I can teach him?"
Yeah.
So I said, "Yeah, I don't see any reason why not." And that started an interesting thing, because all of a sudden I came up against resistance I wasn't expecting from other instructors that said, "No, she can't teach self-defense. She's not a black belt."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Why have you got to be a black belt to teach self-defense?"
Sure.
And it was just the sort of custom and practice that had evolved over time. So I said, "No, I'm going to teach her." And I got a lot of stick for it, I can tell you now. But I just thought, well, I've worked in the forces and I've worked with the Marines, and I know guys in the Special Forces, and there's no way, if you did 36 weeks to become a Royal Marine Commando, they're going to say, "Well, you can't do any armed combat unless you do another 5 years to black belt. You'd be laughed out of the Corps." So I said, "No, I'm going to teach her." And that's how that started, really. So I started teaching her, and that picked up momentum. And then I got invited by the police to join crime prevention panels. And this is the one thing I would say to people is, a lot of people worry about stuff is, will it work or whatever? Just do it. Don't hesitate. Do stuff, because one thing will lead to another somewhere down the line. And that's how my life sort of evolved. And then I got a contract from a retailer who asked me to get involved with teaching retail staff how to deal with theft and violence. So I said, "Yeah, I can do that." I had no idea how to do it, so I learned. But it was a good contract. And then I was asked by a hospital to look at their restraint systems. And I wasn't teaching restraint. I'd done restraint as a prison officer, but I went and had a look at their systems. And I said, right, and because I was qualified in things like risk assessments and that sort of thing, I wrote the risk assessment for them, which told them what they needed to do.
Yeah.
But they couldn't get a training provider to do it. No training provider would do it, because they kept saying, well, it's not approved by certain agencies. So we started looking into the approval system and saying, well, what does approval mean? And we found out that most of the approvals out there were just basically in-house approval stuff that someone had given a badge.
Yeah.
And it wasn't anything of any standard. So the organization said, "Look, would you do it for us?" And I said, "No, I don't want to get involved with this. It's not my game. It's too much backstabbing and political going on there." And they were really nice people. And they said, "Look, we really need this done. Will you do it as a one-off?" So I said, "Well, I'll do it as a one-off, but don't tell anyone."
Okay.
And they said, "All right." So we did it, and I give a guarantee, I always have done, that if I train you and you need me, I'll come. And they had a really bad situation. They had basically a gang fight in the A&E department. People were stabbed, someone died, and it ended up at the Old Bailey. And the staff were naturally worried about going to court.
Yeah, of course.
And I said, well, I'll come with you. So I went along and supported them at the Old Bailey, and they were so grateful that they told everyone. And that's how this sort of part of my life evolved.
Fantastic. Good. Yeah. So when was the initial step then to form NFPS? Because obviously you've got a really good background in other things as well. I was reading up on the quantum thinking, the expert witnesses, things like that, hostage negotiation as well. These are all little strings to your bow, I suppose. And have they all come together into the kind of NFPS family? Is it a combination of experiences?
Yeah, like I said, there was no great plan. When I was a prison officer, I worked with young offenders. Yeah. And I came onto the unit one morning, and there was a young boy smashing up his cell. He was about 16 years old, and he was trying to rip the sink off the wall. And outside the room was a restraint team with shields and batons and helmets and gloves all ready to go in and restrain him. And I just sort of crazily said, has anyone spoken to him? They said, no, you can't speak to him. It's health and safety this, health and safety that. But I noticed that all of his belongings, the little stuff he had, were all nicely on his bed, because he wants to look after what he's got, which isn't a lot in prison for prisoners. But the rest of his cell was being smashed up, and he was ripping the sink off the wall. So I went in the cell and I sat down and I started eating one of his biscuits. Right. And he stopped and sat down next to me with a sink in his hand. There was water everywhere. It was hilarious. And he said, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm ever so sorry. I said, I rushed into work this morning. I haven't had any breakfast. I said, I hope you don't mind, which totally threw him.
Yeah.
And he went, that's all I've got. I said, look, if you let me have a biscuit or two, I'll buy you another packet, I promise. And he went, really? I went, yeah. So he sat down next to me to make sure I only ate 2 biscuits. And when he calmed down, I said, you do know there's a restraint team outside. They're going to come in and they're going to hit you with shields and batons, and you're going to be dragged down the seg. And he went, yeah. I said, but if you let me handcuff you and walk you down there, they can't touch you, and I'll buy you a packet of biscuits. And he went, all right. So that I did that. And someone watching it went, mate, you'd make a great hostage negotiator. That's how that happened. So I just didn't, I was invited onto the program. And, again, no great plan, just one of those things that happened. And I got interested in NLP in the early days, because all of us are in training. Our key skill is communication, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I got interested in high levels of communication because we covered stuff on the hostage negotiation course, but I wanted to learn more. So I got involved with NLP. And then I watched someone on an NLP course, Richard Bandler, hypnotize a guy on stage. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, this is unbelievable. I've got to learn how to do that. So I became a cognitive hypnotherapist. And then that led to the interest in quantum mechanics and quantum physics. And again, I just want to stress for everyone, I'm not an academic. I left school with literally no qualifications whatsoever. I didn't read a book until I was on my first ship. I'm not a reader, not an academic at all. But the interest sparked something in me. And the world of quantum mechanics and quantum physics is absolutely astounding, because we literally, as these three-dimensional human beings, have the ability to change what we experience in life by the way we choose to think. And that took me off on a completely different paradigm, and I'm still, I still use the principles right up to this day.
Yeah, for those that aren't aware, then, how would you classify NLP, or how would you describe it to someone that didn't really know what it was?
Right. Well, if you take the words NLP, it stands for neuro-linguistic programming. Yeah. So in its simplest form, and I'm probably doing it a disservice, neuro is neurological, linguistic is language, and it's how your language can help program your brain. Now, NLP was born out of the need to understand people's subjective experience. So if you think about most of the habits we have, good or bad, they have the building blocks of those habits in our minds. So if I asked you to say, which side of the door is your door handle on, without even thinking, you may go, oh, it's on that side, and reach for it, because you've got an image in your mind of what that door handle looks like. So if you break down what they call the modalities, but basically the structure of a thought, then it has an image primarily, it will have a sound, and it will have a color. So any thought, good or bad, will have those 3 components and subcomponents of them. So for example, it might be a bright image or a dark image, or it might be a loud sound or a soft sound. By playing with those modalities, you can change the structure of the experience. And what's really powerful with it, one of the things that I've used it for successfully, is helping people that have had things like PTSD. Yeah. Because coming from a military background, if someone's had a bad experience and they're talking to someone that wasn't in the military, they don't really want to tell them about what they've been through.
Yeah.
With this, you just need to know how the experience is structured. So I don't need to know exactly what's happened. So you don't have to share that. But if I can say, well, tell me what color it is, tell me what shape it is, tell me where the sound is, and all the other modalities, and then change those modalities, you can change the experience, and you can help people in ridiculously short periods of time. You know, whereas a psychotherapist may take 5 years to change someone lying on a couch, you can cure phobias with this in literally minutes.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And it's been great for training because, you know, you get people come on training courses. I'm sure you, as a very experienced instructor, have experienced it. You'll get someone come on, they look absolutely fantastic. You think, blimey, that person could do press-ups on their tongue. But inside, they're anxious. They're worried that they might not be able to do it, or they might fail the exam, or they might do whatever.
Yeah.
So we brought this into the training with the NFPS family, where we can help them get through the course. And our success rate with students now is through the roof.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about passing the exam or getting through the course. It's about creating the right mindset and getting rid of the limiting beliefs to get them through the exam and through the course.
It's a whole package thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. What packages do you offer then with NFPS for people that might be interested? I know you've done the self-defense training, you've done the handcuff, you've done the restraint. What else do you offer in terms of?
Well, they're primarily our three big products, which is the 5-day BTEC Level 3 Restraint Instructor Award course. We do a 2-day self-defense instructor course. We do handcuff training, conflict management training. We're doing some great work at the moment in what's called Nicholas Carnegie's ABC system, because she's done phenomenal work in schools where she's reduced restraints right down to a minimum by using conflict management models, so that she's, you know, enhanced and improved and developed over the years. And we've got a 1-day trainer's course on that. And what's interesting actually about talking about these courses is people say to me, how can you teach restraint in 5 days? And how can you make someone a self-defense instructor in 2 days?
Yeah.
Well, there's a principle called the Pareto principle, or Pareto principle, depending on how you pronounce it. And if you look at success, 80% of ability for a person to succeed only comes from 20% of what they know.
Mm.
Now, if you take out the 80% that's not functional and you're left with the 20%, if you think about something that's a 10-day course and you take out all the negatives that are holding people back, your 20% is your 2-day course. And then you just put lots of positive reinforcement on those courses. You give them lots of pre-course learning, lots of post-course support. And a lot of, particularly with the self-defense course, a lot of the people that come to us anyway, you know, they're not stupid people. You know, they brought up families. They can drive cars. They can drive HGVs. Some have jumped out of aircraft. Some have taught self-defense and done amazing stuff. Yeah. And the reason it came to a 2-day course is we're not prescriptive in what we expect them to teach. We teach them a set of principles with the legal background, the health and safety frameworks, and then they apply their skills in those principles, and we can give them a formal qualification at the end of it.
Amazing, yeah. How important then do you think it is for martial arts instructors, for self-defense instructors, to learn the legal aspect of what they're doing?
Oh, massively. I would say that's a priority number one. Because
be over the physical side, do you think?
No, definitely. And this is not just my opinion. We researched this. We interviewed in the early days hundreds and hundreds of people when I was doing some work with what was then called the Hillingdon Crime Prevention Panel. And I would go out with the police and we would run these courses for companies where at the end of every day for 6 weeks, 1 day a week, you did 2-hour sessions on self-defense. Yeah. And I would ask them, you know, what do you want to know? And they would say, well, it's all great saying we can hit them here and we can kick them there, but we can get in trouble for that, can't we? You know, so what does the law mean? And I'll never forget this moment. I was with a really big copper, a lovely bloke. And he said, you do all the physical stuff, he said, and I'll talk about the crime prevention stuff. So at the end of one of these sessions, there was a group of ladies from this company there. And we said, any questions? They said, yeah, could you tell us what reasonable force means? So I thought, brilliant, I could learn something else. Over to you. And I can remember to this day the exact words he used, because he said, reasonable force depends on the circumstances. So if you use force that's unreasonable in a set of circumstances, you could be found guilty of a charge and go to court and end up being prosecuted. But if you're found innocent and what you did was reasonable, then you won't have any charge levied against you and you won't be prosecuted. And I looked at him and I thought, I don't understand that. And these women in the group went, what does it mean? And he's just repeated the same thing. Sure. And we were losing the group. And they said, well, a lot of good you lot are, you know, this is rubbish. So I said, ladies, look, we just finished the first session. By next week, I'll have an answer for you if you'll come back. And they lifted the mood and they went, brilliant. So they all went away happy. I was thinking, oh, at least we've saved the course. And this big copper said to me, good luck with that. I said, what do you mean? He said, we've got lawyers who've done 5 years of law school. He said, work for the CPS. They can't explain it. I thought, my God, have I bitten off more than I can chew?
Yeah.
But for that week, the week leading up to the following, in that 7-day interim period, I read more books on law than you can imagine. I was ringing up lawyers and asking, I didn't know them, but I'd ring up and say, look, I'm in a really tight spot here. Can you help me out?
Sure.
And a lot of people were really gracious, and they said, yeah, we'll explain this to you. And I didn't understand what they were talking about. You know, I was a young lad who worked in the Navy. I didn't understand legal jargon.
Sure.
But by the end of 7 days, I had enough to go back and say, this is what it means. And next week, I'll have some more for you. So it was just that one step at a time thing. And I found it fascinating. It is really important because when we give advice as instructors, we're liable for that advice.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think a lot of people know this, but if you give advice that's illegitimate or wrong or incorrect, and someone goes away and applies that advice and then they're prosecuted, they can bring a claim against the instructor.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's negligent, our insurance policies won't pay out.
Yeah.
You know, so hugely important. Probably more important than the techniques.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many grey areas then, as you kind of alluded to yourself, in terms of self-defense and what people can do, what people can't do, and sometimes getting through that area is difficult. So how do you kind of manage that? How do you get through those grey bits that aren't completely clear cut?
Which grey bits specifically, Dan?
So, for example, like you said, you know, what is necessary, what is proportionate, what is those words that are sometimes difficult for people to understand, especially if they're doing a 1 or 2 day course.
Well, I think one of the strengths,
maybe. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, one of the strengths we brought to the community, self-defense community as a whole, is we've taken difficult legal language and filtered that down into everyday language that people can understand. So when we do our course, we do the modules of the course on reasonable force. We reference it in layman's terms, but we also put the references to the legal documents as well that they can look at. Yeah. So when you look at necessity, you know, it's quite simple. It's purely based on, did you honestly believe that it was necessary for you to do something at that moment in time?
Yeah.
And even if you believed it was right and you did it wrong, you're still protected under that thing of necessity. You know, and what the jury of 12 have got to do is to prove that a reasonable person in similar circumstances to you would not have held that belief. Right? But if there's any doubt whatsoever, then the case will be acquitted on that aspect. And proportionate, the second part of reasonable. So if it was necessary in the first instance, then it comes to the proportionate aspect. That simply means is what you've done justified by the harm it's prevented. So to give you an example of this, in my early days, I was working with that hospital I was telling you about.
Yeah.
They asked me to look at a case where 2 nurses were suspended for harming a child. And what had happened was they had a children's ward on the 4th floor of this hospital. It's an inner city hospital. And the window restrictors on one of the windows were faulty. Okay. The child had come in with a head injury. They'd sutured the child and he was, under anaesthetic. But when he woke up, he didn't know where he was. He had learning disabilities. He was panicking and he went to this window and started pushing the window and he broke the window restrictors and he was trying to climb out this window. Now, had he fallen, he'd have died. There's no 2 ways about it. So the 2 nurses there, without any training whatsoever, thought, we've got to do something. So they basically rugby tackled the child and dragged him back in. They believed they had to, that was necessary. When they dragged him back in, they all fell backwards, and the child, I can't remember if it was a radiator or a bed, he hit his forearm on it, and he broke his arm.
Right.
Well, they were immediately suspended for causing harm to a child. They nearly ended up on a child protection list, and that's when I was brought in. And I said, well, who's investigating this? So I got in front of the people who were investigating it. I said, well, do you think that what they did was necessary in their own minds? And they went, yeah. Well, yeah, but they weren't trying. I said, it doesn't matter whether they're trained or not. Do you think that they thought it was necessary to save that child's life? They went, yeah. I said, okay, if the child had fallen, what would have been the extent of harm? And all the panel agreed, he'd, very high probability he'd have been dead.
Yeah.
So I said, right, so is a broken wrist justified by the fact they prevented a death? And they went, yeah. I said, you can't charge them because what they did was reasonable. But sadly, even today, there's still people in positions that can make judgments on people in work environments and charge them with stuff and dismiss them and discipline them and send their name to the Secretary of State for inclusion on the list. That don't understand those 2 basic principles. That's again why it's so important that people need to understand it.
And how do you think the best way to get people to understand that is? People are in the high positions, maybe.
Educate yourselves. I mean, they go on CPD courses for everything, don't they?
Yeah.
There's management training courses, management training courses for that.
Yeah.
I used to run for a couple of contracts. I would do management training courses on reasonable force, and I would take examples from their incident reporting logs and say, right, this happened. let's apply the basic principles. And they would very soon realize that, okay, my opinion that was not right was wrong. And that's a hurdle, because you have to overcome someone's bias on that. So you've got to be, sensitive with it. But it's a fundamental skill. If you're in a position where you are going to suspend someone from work, investigate them, discipline them, and maybe ruin their life, you better know what you're talking about, because if that person goes to an industrial tribunal and comes after you, they can bring a claim for thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of pounds of damages.
Yeah. In terms of the physical side then of what you teach in the self-defense courses, what does that rely on? What does that focus on?
Primarily basic gross motor skills.
Okay.
It's all gross motor skills, nothing complex. Because you're a very experienced guy, and lots of people watching this will know that all the complex stuff will fall apart when your heart rate goes up to a certain rate.
Yep.
And there's psychological reasons as well as physiological reasons for that. We know that when we get in confrontation, the frontal lobe shuts down. We go back to the limbic system, the primitive brain, which gives us very basic options around the fight, flight, and freeze response, or the hide response, if you want to call it that one. So if we teach anything too complex, it's going to lose it, because our neocortex, the big brain, which has between 14 to 16 billion nerve cells in it, that's a fantastic thing. That allows us to compute calculations that can send rockets into space and land on the moon, and aircraft to take off and land at a certain place at the right time. That's great. But the minute you get under stress, that shuts down, and you go back to a brain that's basically, a 50,000-year-old monkey, that's going to go, well, you've got three basic options. What do you want to do? Yeah. So a lot of our physical skills are very simple gross motor skill.
Perfect. Good. You've also written some books then. Do you want to talk a little bit about the books that you've written, how that came about, why you wanted to write them and put it down on paper?
Right. I've written a few books. One is called Understanding Reasonable Force. Yeah. I wrote another one about what is physical intervention. I've written my first book was called Managing the Monkey, which is about the conflict management side of things.
Okay.
And then I've written two books around how the brain works, which is called Understanding Quantum Thinking and Live This Life. And the reason I wrote the books was so I would understand what I wanted to learn. It's that simple. For me to learn something, I need to write it down. I need to study it. So if you look at my office, there are notepads everywhere. I'm old school. I write things down. And I started writing things down. I thought, well, I might as well put this into a book, and I genuinely put it into a book so I could have it on my bookshelf so I could reference it for me. And they're on Amazon, and they're out there if people want to see them.
Yeah, perfect. And how have you coped then recently in the kind of COVID situation? I've seen you've been quite active on social media and putting your take and things perspective out there. So yeah, how have you been doing with them?
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I'm doing absolutely great. It's like anything, we have to adapt and we have to overcome. And when recently we had Lofty Wiseman come and talk on one of our courses. I've known Lofty a long time, love the man, and he has this pyramid. And the bottom of the pyramid is the will to live. And he refers to it from when he was in the jungles and when he was, doing operation and everything else. You must have this will to live that's going to survive. Yeah. You need that in this situation. You've got to have that determination to come out the other side. The sad thing for a lot of people, and this is why I'm so active on social media, is people now are caught like rabbits in the headlights, and they're worrying about it. And you've only got to turn the news on, and it's, so many people have died today and so many people happen today. And a true fact of all this is if you focus on that, that's where your thoughts are going to dominate. And, an example, Dr. Lisa Rankin wrote a fantastic book called Mind Over Medicine. And she said that first-year medical students studying tropical diseases, 79% of them, I believe it's 79 or 71% of them, it's certainly a high percentage, 79% of them get the symptoms of the disease they're studying. Yeah. So this is why we have hypochondriacs. They think they've got something, they Google it, and they think, oh, and then they get more of the symptoms.
Symptoms fit, yeah.
So if people are focusing purely on the negative, and I'm not saying this isn't real, it's real, it's happening, but if you choose to focus on the negative, what happens is exactly what I said happens in that brain. Your capacity to be creative and to use your brain for its massive infinite capabilities is shut down because you're working on fear. And if you're in fear, you're triggering the amygdala and you've got basic response options. So you're going to end up with more of what you're focusing on, basically, in layman's terms. So my job now is to serve. It's not to sell, it's to serve. So if I see someone struggling on social media, I'll try and help them. I'll put stuff out there that may help them. Before we did this today, I've answered 3 emails to people that are looking for some help and support and advice, because that's what I feel we should be doing right now. For those of us that have been in the industry long enough, who may have some knowledge that people can use, just get it out there, you know. And if anyone's watching this, if you've got anything they can share, they should share it. Don't be shy about sharing it, you know. If it helps someone, you've done a good thing.
Definitely. What's the plan for the future then, Mark? When this has hopefully kind of progressed on to the next stage, or loosening off, or moved on, or a miracle cure's found, or whatever's going to happen, what's your plans for NFPS and the plans for yourself for the next year, 6 months, whatever?
Well, I hit 60 in August, so yeah. My plan, and this is people know me are going to laugh at this, because my plan is to slow down. I've had a plan to slow down for 5 years. Okay. And I just get busier and busier, so I'll never slow down and I'll never finish. So the plan really is, you know, unfortunately I don't have one, because like I said to you, I don't plan stuff, I just do stuff. But I'll be doing more of the same. You know, we'll be running our courses, we'll be doing things differently, we'll become more creative and more inventive in how we do stuff. I'm going to be teaching more of the mindset stuff as well. You know, I've made a commitment to do that, because I think that will really, if people understand it, they'll do it. Because I see a lot of stuff out there on meditation and, you know, positive thinking, and it's all great, but it doesn't go deep enough for people to understand it. So if they understand how stuff works, you know, and the reason I do that is because when I first got involved with this, and people were saying, oh, you need to meditate like this, you need to do it, I thought, you know, I'm just an ex-serviceman. I'm not going to dance around a tree in open-toed sandals. You know, it's not me. Yeah. When someone explained the science behind it to me, and I realized that there's a massive physiological and psychological benefit in doing this, that's when I did it. So it's just, I'm just going to carry on educating people for as long as I'm walking around on 2 feet, really.
Fantastic. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for chatting to us. Really appreciate it. We'll chat in 5 years and then see if you have slowed down or not.
Yeah,
but yeah, no appreciate the time, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Dan. All the best.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Goodbye.